effort to keep us on time, I am going to move us forward. I would like to introduce our speakers today. We are welcoming two speakers. The first, Caitlyn Farbotnik. She is a state conservation agronomist and grazing specialist and is currently acting as the Northeast Regional Soil Health Specialist. She has a BS in agroecology with minors in agricultural entomology and soil science from the University of Wyoming. After graduating, she worked for NRCS Wyoming before moving back to her home state of Pennsylvania, where she worked as a soil conservationist and is now with NRCS in New Jersey. Caitlyn enjoys working with planners and farmers to develop practical solutions for each farm's specific challenges and believes that every soil health system should be designed to be dynamic and adaptable. When not working her day job, Caitlyn is the fourth generation on her family farm where she and her husband raise grass-fed beef, pastured pork, and pastured poultry for retail sale at farmers markets and for their farm CSA. Our second speaker today is Matthew Denton. He is the NRCS Soil Health Division's East Region Team Leader and most recently served as Area Resource Conservationist in West Tennessee. In that role, he provided conservation opportunities, resources, and education for all producers to help protect, conserve, and manage their land. Matthew received his BS in Natural Resource Management, Soil and Water Conservation from the University of Tennessee Martin, and his MS in Plant and Soil Science at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Matthew currently resides on the family Century Farm in Dyer, Tennessee, with his wife and two daughters, where they manage a vegetable and row crop operation in addition to producing livestock, including small ruminants and beef cattle. Soil health has been a major component of his operation personally and in his career professionally, implementing and promoting all aspects of soil health management and integration. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers today. Just give us a moment here, and I will stop sharing. And Matthew, feel free to start sharing as soon as you're ready.
Thanks, Rachel. Are you getting my audio?
Yep, I can hear you great.
All right.
Oh, that was okay. That makes sense. He was just petting his cat.
It's connecting here. Bear with us.
It's starting to come through. There we go.
All right. Hopefully you're seeing the creating meaningful change for soil health slide. Thumbs up. All right. All right. Well, I hope that this this presentation flows properly. Caitlyn and I are going to alternate with me kicking things off. So we're going to try to keep this as engaging as possible, and we will ask you to interact with us a couple of times throughout the presentation in the chat. So again, we're very excited to be here. Anytime we get an opportunity to talk to a group like this about soil health, it really lights our fires. But in addition to that, we were asked to talk about our individual operations. So that's doubly important to us, and we appreciate the invite and are glad to be here today. So I am Matthew Denton. I'm currently serving with the Soil Health Division for the East Region, and I'll go through a couple slides here, talk about my operation, and then we'll hand it off to Caitlyn. All right. So we're going to focus quite a bit of our discussion today around the soil health principles, and there are several iterations of these principles, but where we are with the division and with an agency is these four: maximize continuous living roots, minimize disturbance, maximize soil cover, and maximize biodiversity. And certainly the integration of livestock and/or their manures would fit under the biodiversity principle. In my opinion, the two easiest principles to start with are minimize disturbance and maximize soil cover. So we're going to talk about those quite a bit today. We first need to reduce erosion. If you have erosion on your farm, you certainly can't improve soil health if it's leaving the premises. So the process of erosion, just as a reminder, we have the 3 steps: availability and detachment, transport and deposition. So looking at minimizing disturbance, we don't want to overgraze. We don't want to create bare spots in our fields. That's where soil particles can become detached and thus leave their previous location. If we're using annuals, we want to try to limit the amount of tillage. There are different types of ways that we can establish annual plants, but a low disturbance drill is typically the preferred uh, method. If you do have to utilize tillage, uh, we, we encourage you to utilize that and in a time of year and get it covered as quickly as possible. May benefit to use a nurse crop. Looking at maximizing soil cover, our other principle here, getting a quick cover in the mix. If using annuals or perennials, want to be sure and monitor the pasture so that there is no overgrazing, as I mentioned, to reduce the bare spots. We also we'll talk a little bit about these, but maximize living root. We want to try to keep something living all year round, and that's really important. And it's something that's fairly easily attainable in pasture settings. And then the last one there, the maximize biodiversity. We'll talk quite a bit about this principle, but maximizing the diversity has huge impacts and implications on your soil, the soil life, and really your bottom line. We want to talk today about, you're going to hear about small ruminants and also about beef cattle and other species as well. So we want to focus on and promote the utilization of multi-species forage and animals. So one last thing on this slide, as we move through this presentation, you'll notice that there are these 4 ovals on the left-hand side, and these are relating um, to the 4 principles. So CR is continuous root, EMD, minimize disturbance, so on and so forth. When you see a green color, that is going to indicate that a technique directly impacts the principle, whatever we're talking about. If you see yellow, then that's going to indicate that there is an indirect connection between the principle and the technique. If you see a blue color, then that is a technique that is unrelated to that principle. So hope that helps us tie all this together and tie back to the principles as we move through our topics. So to kick things off, I want to give just a couple of slides and an overview of my operation, and then Caitlyn will do the same. So the operation here that I am blessed and fortunate enough to utilize, we have about 18 acres of pasture that we have access to. We have about 6 acres of grazed cropland, and this is mainly where I do my vegetable production. Got 34 acres of hayland and about 125 acres of ungrazed row crop ground. And really that is due to proximity and also lack of infrastructure. Unfortunately, I'm just not able to get livestock to those farms. We have about 80 acres here that we have access to with various land uses that are here where I'm sitting today in West Tennessee, in north central West Tennessee in Gibson County. But we raise beef cattle mainly direct to producer. I just took 5 steers off last week to the local processor, and those are direct to consumer. And then we also raise small ruminants. Started with 2 goats, one for each of my daughters. Fruity and So-So were their names. And anyway, again, we've expanded quite a bit from those days. We'll average about 100 head of boar influence goats here. I do get up to maybe 200 head at some points. I do some backgrounding. Prices are really high right now, so I haven't gotten back into that. But that's the most I've had at any one time is right around 200. On the vegetable production side, I've been doing that. I've been implementing soil health management since 1999. That was my first vegetable crop. We've learned a lot since then. We no-tilled sweet corn, and I've been growing covers. I guess we started growing covers in 2001, really before soil health had its label. I guess it was soil quality back then, but started out with single species, and then now I use a 7 or 8 way blend normally, and we try to graze as much of that as possible. So for my part of discussion, I'm going to focus mainly on small ruminants. I know Caitlyn's going to talk about cattle and her operation, but I really learned quickly getting in the small ruminant business that it was important for them to graze with their head up as often as possible. They are typically a browsing animal, and I try to incorporate things into the system that would mimic that. So we use summer annuals, sorghum Sudan and pearl millet usually are the main grass species that we use. They get tall. If any of you have used them, they get tall. So the animal, when they graze, they typically are well above the soil surface, and that helps with parasite issues. We also, as I mentioned, we implement multi-species winter cover, and we graze those as well. I utilize temporary hot net fence to do that. And it's one of the drawbacks is that's pretty laborious, but I really like, I just took some fence down this weekend, and I had outside the fence, I had about 24-inch tall cover crop, and inside it was 6 to 8 inches. I try to take half, leave half, but it really excited me to see their utilization of that forage and that thus, taking pressure off another part of the farm or hay production as well. I'll mention this, the vegetable production allows me a wide window to establish the winter cover, and I can actually get in there sometimes late August, and that really gets me a lot of growth, and I actually can start grazing earlier than normal operations. That bottom picture on the bottom right is my 2 daughters there at a most recent show. So we do try to raise some show animals as well, and working with the 4-H and the local livestock association. One other slide here, just I like the correlation between soil health and animal health. I'm going to talk about parasites and foot issues really briefly, but the internal parasites with the system that I have in place, my internal parasites have really I've really managing those well. You don't totally ever eliminate them completely out of the animal, but the utilization of the rotational grazing and the incorporation of the Sericea lespedeza hay, which I started about 3 years ago, has really helped. And I just don't see the issues that I saw previously. I used the FAMACHA method, which I check their eyelids and I only worm if they have an issue, and it really has cut back on that with what we're implementing. And the last thing that I'm still battling, excuse me, is this issues around my barn, and then thus foot issues with the small ruminants. So internal parasites and then foot scald or foot rot are the main 2 issues that I have in my operation, and I'm still trying to get that under control. I've installed some roof runoff management. I've installed some heavy use areas there around the barn lot, but I've got to do more of that. As you can see from the photos, we're still battling that. We got 6 inches of rainfall last week, so it really is a challenge for us. But again, we'll talk more about that and some compaction issues that we're battling as well as we move through. Caitlyn?
All right, thanks, Matthew. Hey, you have a question in the chat. Could you explain what you meant when you said you background
Sure.
some goats?
Absolutely. The backgrounding, when I reference that, this can apply to multiple different types of livestock, but this means taking an animal that you typically did not raise and then feeding them or letting them graze to a certain weight and then selling them or transferring them off farm. So what I do for the small ruminants is I'll get them anywhere from 25 to 35 pounds, and then I'll feed them up or let them graze and grow to around 50 or 60 pounds when they're really at that marketable weight. But this also can be applied to beef operations or other operations as well, as where you're taking an animal and at one weight and then feeding or letting them graze to another weight and then they're moving on. Thanks, Caitlin, for that. I didn't see that question.
No problem. All right. Yeah. So my name's Caitlin. I want to talk to you a little bit about my farm, some of the challenges that we're trying to deal with on our farm, some things that I think are working pretty good for our soil health system. But here's an aerial of our operation here. We only farm the home farm. It's about 80 acres. That house there in the, I guess, northwest corner, that is not part of the farm, but that block there from Sawmill to Street, and then we actually have a little block of woods that's off the photo here. It's all in hay or grass. Everything that's tillable is in hay or pasture. We didn't really set out to do an all grass-fed operation. It's just when my parents stopped dairying and stopped doing grain farming, they sold all the equipment, and we had the hay equipment still. So it was easier just to start with the grass-fed route than to try doing grain-fed, which turned out well though, because that's I live in Southeast Pennsylvania, and it's grass-fed is a big trend right now that I'm hoping is going to stay around. And so we do direct sales. We have a farmer's market, a couple that we do, but we're cutting down to just one this year, our best farmer's market, and then we're expanding our CSA as well. So we really try to market that, the grass-fed, the pastured pork, the pastured poultry market right to the consumer. Matthew, did you want to? Thank you. So some of the things that we like to do, I'm going to talk about pigs for a little bit right here, and then I'm going to talk about my cows a little bit later on. But we do run pigs. We have them in pasture, and then we have them in, it's a wooded area, but it's mostly ash trees that have gone down. So it's really just more kind of open, brushy area right now. In the summertime, the spring, the fall, we do pretty good with them. We do run them on annual pastures, so we can't keep perennials with the pigs. This is one of our seed mixes that we use in those annual pastures for the pigs. And then, did you want to next picture, please, Matthew? Thanks. One of the issues that we deal with all the time with our pigs and our cows is fencing. So, Matthew just said he took down some tent fence for his goats, and our pigs, just in the area we have them, they do tend to root up on those tent fences. So these are some really truly free-ranging pigs that we came across the other day coming down the farm path. So that's something that we struggle with when moving pigs. If we don't have permanent fence in place, we really struggle with the temp fencing for the pigs and trying to keep electric, solar powered chargers charged up, and especially if we're more in a wooded area where we like to have the pigs because it's shady in the summertime. We have a hard time keeping charges on those fences. So next picture, please. We do have some major problems with our pigs. We are definitely not perfect. This is our feeder area where we overwinter, because we overwinter outside. This is one thing that we're actually going to change. We're going to start bringing our pigs in the wintertime and the summertime now, just because we can't maintain vegetation in the wintertime. So this is just, it's a muddy mess right now. And then next picture. This is our breeder pen here, which is set up a little bit differently. This is our little overwintering area. So we've got our feeder area and then our breeder area. And this one here, at least we can get better vegetation around. But Matthew, if you click on the next picture, I mean, you can see how bare it is in here. We do try to buffer it. So this is some rye that was planted down and works as a pretty good buffer. Again, we're not in that area where the pigs are though. We're not keeping the soil covered. We don't have too much diversity. This is just a straight rye mix. Definitely don't have something living all year long. And then if you go to the next picture, we do have, even on such a small area, quite a bit of erosion coming off of these areas. So even with the buffers in place and, everything that we try to keep them in a real flat spot, we still have these issues that we're dealing with. So this is a prime example of why we would like to move our pigs inside. And then in the summertime, like I said, in those shady areas, we just have a really hard time keeping those fences charged. And the pigs, they need shade because it gets hot in Pennsylvania in the summertime. And so it'll be easier to control the climate in the barn for them, unfortunately. But that's what we need to do. So further on in the presentation, I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about my cows. But I think, Matthew, are we heading into breakout sessions?
We are, Caitlyn.
Okay.
We're to that point.
Awesome.
Yep, I can, Matthew. Yep. And I see you're starting to share your content, so I think you're in good shape.
Yeah, just a little bit of transition time here. I apologize.
You look good. We see it now.
All right. Okay, audio good and slides good, right?
Yep. All
Looking
set.
good.
All right. All right. So we're going to move into managing the land. And again, Caitlyn and I are going to alternate these topics. And we just talked about this during our breakout, but obviously there's an importance for lime, or an importance to have a near neutral pH. So in no-till systems in pastures, they tend to accumulate acidic characteristics in the first couple inches of the soil profile. In no-till and pasture systems, lime should be applied at smaller intervals more frequently, because with the absence of tillage, hopefully, you only rely on rain events to flush the materials further in the profile. So lime ideally should be applied before, get your crystal ball out, before a light, steady rain event. I mentioned we just got 6 inches of rain here in Tennessee last week, so no light and steady rain events here, just a couple inches at a time. But I do one thing I like to utilize for lime application is to spread it before the drilling of annuals or cover crops. That's a good way to help at least expedite that incorporation the best you can by maintaining a no-till system. So looking at here at this table, this shows you that most species like that near neutral pH. There are a few, obviously blueberries is the outlier there. Here's just a different graphic representation of where nutrients are available. And if you notice that inside the green box there, that it's right around the 6.5 to 7 pH range. I mentioned this earlier, that on my farm, compaction is a really an issue for me, and one that I try to reduce at every opportunity. It's one of the biggest risks we have. If you look there, sheep and goats would be equivalent there at 12 psi of pressure. I really like the small ruminants from a compaction standpoint versus, say, cattle down there at 27 psi. Obviously, overgrazing here presents lots of challenges. Looking at bulk density, thinking about the piece of bread analogy, pour spaces and squeeze and it's all gone. It really happens quick. You want to try to move as frequently as you can every couple of days. Animals that are walking have the bigger impact, as you can see there, almost double from cattle that are standing there. So most grazers are moving. Ruminants will sit and ruminate, but for the most part, they are on the move. Also here, just another plug for erosion control. That's one of the first aspects of management that you should try to get to a stable point before some others, because obviously if you have erosion, you're going to have compaction issues are going to be exacerbated there. So that's one of the first things, just as another reminder to focus on. Talking about bulk density, it's one of the most important aspects of soil quality or soil health, but it's unfortunately one of the most likely one to be most easily, I guess, negatively impacted by grazing. We're going to talk about some things today that hopefully will help you in making decisions. But generally speaking, a good soil will have about 50% mineral and organic matter, about 25% air, 25% water. That's an ideal world, but the air and the water will fluctuate depending on weather. So having water and air in the soil is obviously important because that's how roots need space, microorganisms need space. They also the space is needed for water. It's important for the flow of nutrients into the plants and also for the soil biology, the microorganisms that move through that water and transport through the soil profile. So looking at bulk density there, there's a table there. It just shows you some ranges for ideal, marginal, and then root restricting bulk density measurements. Pores come in all different sizes. Here's a well aggregated soil. It has a range of pore sizes, small, large, and intermediate or medium. I mentioned the bread analogy. If we overgraze or graze at the wrong time, we can turn our nice porous soil into one that's not favorable for root growth and microorganism habitat. There's just another graphic representation of that ideal bulk density graphic there on the left, and then one that's compacted there on the right with into a restricting bulk density measurement there. So what can we do? How do we know what our bulk density is? Well, the only way to actually know is to take a quantitative measurement and send it to a lab. But we're not going to do that very often, or at least we're not going to do that multiple times throughout the year for most situations. So pugging is a sure sign of compaction. If you see this and this has occurred, like in my photo I showed you earlier, compaction has already occurred. You want to move the animals before this happens. But compaction can also occur deeper than 4 inches, so you may not even see it due to grazing. So before you start to see or think about, anticipate seeing pugging or the effects of compaction, you want to be thinking about the signs of that, and again, you want to move the animals before that happens. And so I've got a table here which gives us some good guidance when you see pugging. What should you do? And it refers to the plastic limit, which refers to the state of the soil at a moisture limit where the soil can be rolled in a thread about 1/8 of an inch thick and start to crumble. So really, that the main takeaway here is the easiest way to think about the limit is comparing it to field capacity. And we have some tools that can help determine that the percent of the field capacity in your soil. So what are some ways that we can prevent pugging? Well, we can just think about moving that livestock off that area before we get to that point, and moisture by feel. We also have some other tools available as well. We have the estimating soil moisture by feel and appearance. If you notice I mentioned earlier the 4 principles there on your right. So when we're looking at compaction, all 4 principles are impacted here. But basically, just checking soil moisture by feel, by appearance, visual inspections. They can tell us a lot. And again, if you're seeing pugging occur, if you can, you should move those livestock immediately. Compaction typically happens when the soil is at the plastic limit. So if you're unsure, we need to check those soils. We also have some information available on the web soil survey for determining some at-risk parts of the farm. That's a good way to also help mitigate the exposure to compaction. And we always want to check the weather. I mentioned our extreme rain events that we just received here in Tennessee. I shut my small ruminants off of the parts of the farm there where I was temporarily grazing during those rain events, just to reduce the impact of compaction. So you just want to visually monitor soil condition and help mitigate those effects as much as you can. So I've got a quick overview here, kind of to close this section out, and then I'll turn it over to Caitlyn. Looking at compaction, bulk density, and soil moisture. So moist soil will compact easier, and it's gonna increase bulk density, which means less pore space, as I mentioned. Think about the bread analogy, and less pore space means less room for water, roots, and air, and then that equals issues with plants and also microbial life. So all of this ties together. Compaction and increased bulk density are sometimes challenging to manage, but one that we can certainly, with proper monitoring, we can prevent and mitigate the impact. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Caitlyn. I think you may have a story to share with us, Caitlyn, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I can attest to some issues with compaction. We had a field, it was about 2 years ago now, and we were trying out intensive grazing, very intensive grazing, which I'll talk about our successes and failures with that in a little bit also. But man, this one field, we were moving about every day. Every 2 days, we're going out, monitoring how tall the plants were, how's everything looking. We had some rain come through. I didn't think it was that bad. The pasture was still looking good, but after that rain came through, it was a little bit more rain than we were expecting. I made the decision not to bring the cows in. Of course, it was the very back pasture, like the furthest away from where our sacrifice area is. So that definitely played a factor into it as well. And yeah, we compacted that area pretty darn good. And it's been 2 years, and it's still, that next season, it came up, but it was the last pasture that would come up. We didn't get much grazing off of it. It was definitely, we were definitely feeling the impacts of that. And then this year, actually, we decided to till that pasture up, because after we had compacted it, yeah, that grass, those forages we had out there, they just weren't growing anymore. And then it's just, really, like Matthew said, it just compiles on top of, you don't have the grass, so you don't have your pore spaces, so you don't have that microbial activity to encourage more grass and encourage more pore spaces to open up. And yeah, so I mean, it was just, it was 2 days. That's all it took. It was just 2 days. And we dealt with it for 2 years. And then finally this spring, we said we got to till this up because this just isn't productive enough anymore. So definitely something that I'm always very concerned about now. Learning lesson for sure. Don't be lazy. Bring those cows in, even if they're the furthest out that they can be when that rain's going to come. So yeah, and I could have watched the weather a little bit more when it got closer. Like, I knew the rain was coming. I didn't realize it was going to be that much rain. So yeah, not a fun lesson to learn, but I won't make that mistake again. Hopefully not. So, okay, so I'm going to talk about how we can manage the plants a little bit to influence the health of our soils and the health of our grazing species. So next slide, please, Matthew. So one thing that, me and Matthew both have been talking about is this idea of grazing, multiple types of forages. And when we're talking about diversity, we're not just talking about diversity of plants. We're also going to be talking about diversity of animals, which Matthew is going to hit on in a little bit. But I'm going to focus on plant diversity in this section here. So this is a schematic. I really like this drawing because it just goes to show all the different benefits we can get if we diversify our forage base a little bit. So if we transition from just a grass forage base, or even if we have multiple types of grasses with different root systems, that's still good. But say we add some chicory in here, which is great for small ruminants. Then we get some taproot in there. We can also get taproot from alfalfa. Dandelion has a taproot, although some people don't like seeing that, but it actually can be a pretty good forage species if it's out there. So we want to think about, especially if you're rejuvenating your pastures or replanting your pastures, overseeding your pastures, try to think about the types of plants that you have out there right now and the root systems on those plants. And then see if you can diversify that type of root system. Because not only in this picture here are we, we've got tap roots, we have fibrous deep roots, we have fibrous shallow roots. So we're breaking up real subsoil compaction, topsoil compaction, we're stopping erosion. We've got there's some clover in here. So if we let that go far enough into the season, maybe we'll get some nitrogen benefits from from having legumes in the system. So it's really important to think about that. And beyond just structurally, every plant and type of plant is going to have a certain set of microbes that like that plant. So the more types of plants that we can have, the more root exudates we have coming out of that plant, the more roots we have sloughing off, the more types of microbes we're going to have in that system. So our system is going to be a lot more resilient. So, when we talk about biodiversity, obviously, this is a no-brainer. Keeping the soil covered, having diversity is really key for that. If we go through a dry spell, maybe those forage species that don't do as well in the heat, we've got some that do a little bit better in the heat. So we can really help to maintain that cover throughout those difficult times of the year. And then we'll reduce erosion, and hopefully we're not overgrazing so we don't have that disturbance. So yeah, our multi-species, having multi-species forages is really important. And we also, if you're grazing multi types of animals, different types of animals, then you're going to get really good utilization out of multi-species forages in one place. So next slide, please, Matthew. One way that we can increase this, especially if we are playing around with some annuals, if we're redoing some pastures, is to add some, if our typical cool season grasses, are going to have bumps in the fall and then the spring, if we can add some species that can maybe extend that season a little bit further into wintertime, stockpiling like tall fescue. You can also stockpile bird's foot trefoil, which grows well with tall fescue also. So that's an option for some more perennial season extension types of techniques. But then, adding in some of these annuals, we use pearl millet. We love pearl millet at our house. Using the sorghum Sudan grass. Matthew loves that for his small ruminants. So if you are using perennials or annuals, there is opportunity to increase your diversity and expand your growing seasons. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so here's a picture of something that we did well and something that we did not do well. So in the fall of 2020, we had planted a ryegrass mix. Very simple ryegrass, and we loved it. And so in April of 2021, now this picture on the left here, you don't normally want to turn your cows in when it's this low. These are our two of our moms. The calves broke in, so the moms broke in. So we're just going to let them stay out there for a day or two before we shuffle them back. But the point is that this was the beginning of April when normally there's not a lot growing, and we had something growing in the wintertime. We had grazed that multiple times the fall that we had planted it in 2020, and we grazed this mix like 4 or 5 times in the spring. It just wouldn't die, and we kept hammering it, purposely hammering it, and it just kept coming back and giving us great forage. Now, we did not put perennials in there in the spring. I don't like planting perennials in the spring. I like doing it in the fall. We didn't get perennials put in the fall last year. So we had a bare field because we went from our fall annuals, we did summer annuals, and then we were going to do perennials, and we just didn't get it seeded down. So April of this year, less than a week later of last year, this is what the field looked like. It's just a bare field. So obviously, this is not desirable. This is not what we want to see. I would much rather see green grass out there, but this is just something that it's a reality of farming, right? We don't get to everything that we want to get to. So we did go in, we're planting a pea and oat mix. We planted that right after this picture was taken. So hopefully we'll get that something growing in that field again, but that was definitely, really good example on the left of a soil health practice, and not so great. The season caught up to us a little too quickly on the right there. And then Matthew, if you can pull that picture in, this is a picture of what the field on the left here, this is what it looked like in the fall. It was, we didn't plant it super early. We planted it around September, the end of September, but we were still able to graze into November on this pasture, and then we let it rest, and then it still had that stubble going through wintertime, and then we grazed it again in the spring. So I would have rather seen that than what we're seeing this year. But like I said, you have to prioritize on a farm, and not everything gets done that you want to get done. And so next slide, please. So those were an example of our winter annuals. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the summer annuals, different mixes that we have tried that worked and did not work. So we did try using a mix like a sorghum Sudan mix. It was one of the crazy mixes. It had sorghum Sudan grass, sun hemp, sunflower, it had brassicas in there. I think it had cowpea in there, some millet. It had a whole bunch of stuff in there. It was like 11 different species. Unlike Matthew's goats, my cows do not like grazing very high. So if you can pull in the next picture there. Can you bring in? Yeah, there we go. So if you can see, this is on the very edge of the field. And it was pretty high when we let those cows in there. You can see some of our calves in the front of this field here. And we quickly decided we did not like going with these crazy mixes, even though they're supposed to have a lot of soil health benefits to it. It just did not work for us. They're pretty expensive. Our cows don't really like the brassicas. I had talked to our seed rep, and she had mentioned that it takes about 5 days before, in our area at least for some reason, that's what she said, typically before cows start actually trying to eat those brassicas. And they have to be in an area for 5 days before being moved before they try them. And we move our cows more than every 5 days. So they weren't even trying them, and they're expensive, so we're paying the money for them, and we're not getting them utilized. The calves didn't mind grazing up high, but the cows just really did not appreciate it. So there was a lot that did not get eaten, and it just got too mature. Something else that's just a personal preference of mine. I like being able to see my animals all the time, because we do live in an area it's southeast-ish Pennsylvania. So we do have neighbors. We do live along a road. I like being able to see my animals all the time. And when we have these high forages, they get lost in there. And that just makes me a little nervous because I don't know where they are. And I like to know where they are all the time. And that also poses a problem too, because when we have our calves, we notice our calves and our cows, it gets a lot noisier because the calves will get lost in there. The cows can't find them. So yeah, it gets pretty noisy on the farm also when we start grazing mixes like this. So if you want to hit the next picture, bring that next picture in. This is a mix that I think it's actually my background photo here. This is a mix that we really love. We found it's a summer mix. It's just a straight cowpea millet mix. We get tons of forage, literally tons and tons of forage off of it. It grows lower, but it's still, you can tell it's about I guess breast high on some, chest high on some of these cows here. So you don't get that real height off of it, but I can still see my cows. They're still getting very nutritious forages. We're still getting the structure of the millet plant and the root system. We're getting some diversity with the cowpea in there. If we let it go enough, we might be able to get some additional benefits from the cowpea. And this one, it will keep coming back. We can graze it multiple times in the summertime. It's a great summer annual. We really prefer this mix. It's much more simpler, but it works for us a lot better. All right, do you want to bring in the next picture? So this is just a picture this is kind of like the end of the season here. This is a calf. He was just a couple days old, or maybe a week old at this point. So to show you kind of what it looks like when it starts dying out at the end of the season. And then I think I got one more picture on this slide, Matthew, and then I'll move on to the next slide. And then this is when we move them. So you can tell we're not grazing too low here. We're still, we're 6-8 inches high before we move them, but we're still able to pull a lot of forage off of these and then move the cows and have that spring back so we can bring them back there multiple more times before the end of the season or before it starts dying out when it gets too cold. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So our utilization rate, I had said that we move our cows more than every 5 days. We try to move our cows every 3 to 4 days. And the reason why is because we just like it. Well, it works for us for the amount of time that we have to invest in moving them. But I also noticed that we get much better utilization, meaning that those animals eat everything in that field or most everything in that field. We don't have a lot of areas that are being left behind because all those areas that are being left behind, that's forage that's not getting consumed. You could put another animal out there maybe. With all that forage that's not getting consumed. So the reason why these utilization rates are really important is because animals, they have something called, grazing animals have like spatial memory. So they'll remember where they got good nutritious forage from. They'll remember exactly where in the field. They'll remember which plant it was from. So they'll go back, and it is very weather dependent. In the spring and the fall, it might be every, say, like 5 to 10 days. In the summertime, it'll probably be a longer period, but they'll go back and just keep eating the same plant over and over and over again. So that's why if you're in a continuous grazing system, you have a very low utilization rate. You can see here it's about 35%. So you're leaving a lot of ground that's not being utilized. The majority of your ground is not being utilized. And why is this important for soil health? It's important because if we keep taking down height off of a plant, if we keep taking those leaves off the plant, and we'll talk about this in a little bit as well, then we're just depleting those root systems. And we really need those roots, again, to keep that bulk density of the soil low. So we have pore spaces. Those roots really help with those pore spaces to keep them open, to keep those microbes happy, that also help with those pore spaces and creating that soil structure. So yeah, you can think about your utilization rate. All right. So Stock and density. This real quick, I know you guys have learned about this already, but just a quick reminder of how stock and density actually works and why we're talking about rotational grazing. So if we're just continuously grazing, right, we have very low utilization rate. If we're continuously grazing, those plants don't really get a time to rest at all because they're just eating the same plant over and over again. Now, if we move to some sort of rotational grazing system, then we configure it, you size it appropriately, where you can allow enough time for those plants to get rested in between your grazing events. And then if you bring in the next, there we go. So, in a continuous grazing system, those plants, they continually get eaten, those plants get depleted. But then when we move to more of a rotational grazing system, and if you're continuous right now and you don't want to go intensive grazing, that's fine. Try just shifting a little bit, moving those animals a little bit quicker. You let those plants recover, those roots recover, and the roots are really key to our soil health. So anything we can do to help those roots recover and grow and thrive is going to be important for our soils. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so here's a little picture here. I'll talk a little bit about our farm. This is when we started out using like once every 7-day moves, and then we decided we're just going to go all in and we're going to move those animals like every day. And that didn't really work out for us. So you can see here in the back part of this one pasture, these were some of our fence lines, very small pastures that we had created, moving them every day. That just did not work for us. We realized that it takes way too much time. Again, I had mentioned this before with the pigs, but we also have trouble fencing our cows. We tried like the Gallagher smart fences. We loved them, but the deer, we have so much deer around us, they just destroy any multi-strand fence that we can get. So even the fences with the step-in post, and you just use the tape or the poly wire and do multiple strands on that, the deer go through that, get tangled up, pull the whole thing down. So we moved to just using the pigtail fences and poly tape. So we'll use the pigtail fences and poly tape, and in order for the cows not to go right underneath that, we do need to give them a little bit more space, which also works with our schedules a little bit more. That gives us a little bit more time to set everything up. Another consideration that we have when doing this is we also, you can see here, we don't have a lot of shade in this one pasture. So when we're breaking this up, this is one of our main pastures here. But unfortunately, we only have shade in the back and a little bit on the one side. So in the summertime, this pasture is mainly unused just because it gets too hot for our cows out there. And we try other mitigation that we can. We try to be on top of our fly control. We actually use smaller water tanks so they're filling up quicker so that water is cool all the time in the summertime. But sometimes it just gets too hot. So there's a lot of considerations that went into why we switched from these super intensive 1-day rotations, and now we move about every 3 to 4 days. That just works out a lot better for us. So we went from one extreme of more of a continuous grazing at 7 days to go into 1 day, and now we're back at like 3 to 4. So, but that's the happy medium. That's what works for us. That's what makes our cows happy. All right, next picture. So this is just a little public service announcement. My husband left his jacket out in the field the other day and didn't tell me. So when I went to go check on the animals, I walked out there and thought like the Grim Reaper was coming after me. I had no idea what this was. I thought somebody was like out in the field. Even the dogs were like staring, trying to figure out what this is. So if you leave your clothes outside, please just make sure you tell whoever's going to check the cows the next day that you left your clothes out there so they don't think something's coming after them. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I know you guys are going to be talking about this at the next session that you have, but I did want to mention the importance of thinking about nutrient management when you're planning your grazing systems, because nutrient management and soil health go hand in hand. So if we are doing a continuous grazing system, it's going to take us a lot longer to put those nutrients in a continuous grazing system where those nutrients need to be. There's kind of a rule of thumb that there's an ultimate goal in nutrient management and grazing that you want to get one cow patty per square yard. And if you're continuous grazing, it's going to take you about 27 years to do that, to accomplish that goal. If you move to, say, a 2-day rotation, a 4-day rotation, you're going to cut that back to 2 to 4 to 5 years, as you can see in the chart here. So not only if you are on a 2-day rotation, you're meeting that goal 13 times over by the time you would have met it just one time in a continuous grazing system. So I'm not going to talk too much about on this because I could talk all day about nutrient management and grazing, but I just wanted to mention that we definitely need to think about manure management and distribution when we're grazing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, our root response to grazing, Matthew had mentioned this, the take half, leave half principle, I had mentioned it. And the importance of roots. Everything really comes back to the importance of our roots. We do not want to take too much of that plant off, because the more of the above ground part of the plant we're taking off, the more it's going to deplete that below ground part of the plant. And that below ground part of the plant is really what feeds our soil. And the soil is what feeds the plant, which is what feeds the animals, which is what feeds our pocketbook, right? So we really need to be thinking about farming for those underground roots, and how are we going to accomplish that? The easiest way to do that is not to take too much. So there's this, take half, leave half principle, which isn't as simple as if you put your animals in when the grass is 12 inches high, you're going to take them out when it's 6 inches high. So just think about this. Don't overgraze too much. Don't take too much of that plant off. And this also goes for, Matthew, if you hit the next picture, this also goes for, oh, sorry. Okay, we'll talk about it in this slide here. I got my picture mixed up. But yeah, customizing, I was going to say that overgrazing and mowing are very similar. So all the principles of grazing too low and overgrazing also applies to mowing. So keep that in mind for your hay fields, and even more specifically, or I guess more importantly for your hay fields, because your hay fields you're not putting on unless you're putting on commercial fertilizers. You're paying for those commercial fertilizers. You're not getting the trampling action from the animals. You're not getting the diversity of microbes from the manure. So your hay fields can actually be more maintenance sometimes than your pastures if you are cutting too low on your hay fields, or recutting before it can grow to the right amount of height. So I think you guys have learned about this before, and we're going to put a packet together for you also that will be available after the presentation. So this information, if you're interested in it, will be in that packet there. So I'm going to just skip over this part right now. And then this is the picture that I was looking for on the last slide there. Okay, Matthew, did you want to talk about grazing your small ruminants a little bit?
Sure. I'll just mention briefly that anytime, and I talked about this earlier about we want them grazing with their heads up. I also try to keep in mind that the time of day that they're grazing. I know this is important for the barber pole worm, which is the biggest issue that I face. I typically give a little supplemental grain in the mornings when the grass is dewy, when the pasture is dewy, and that keeps the kind of fills the bellies of the goats, and they graze later in the day. But that height is very important. We mentioned, Caitlyn and I both have mentioned the desired height impacts, especially for the small ruminants. So I just wanted to mention that. I think it's my section here, managing the animals, Caitlyn. So I'm going to breeze through these pretty quickly. I know we're approaching the end of our time. We mentioned diversity is important not only for our forage species but also for the animal species. And this is just a graphic which reiterates that. I've got this interactive option here. I know we're a little short on time, but I would like to go through and I'll show you here for horses. the kind of how this is going to work. So for cattle, if you will put it in the chat, what you think the distribution is between grass, weeds, and browse, and then we'll maybe skip ahead and look at the cattle and the goats, since we spent most of our time on that. Anybody want to venture a guess in the chat what percent grass and weeds cattle consume? Anything in the chat, Caitlin? How do we define weed? Anything that's undesirable would be considered a weed. A 75%. All right. Very, very good. Very good. Very close. 70-20 on cattle. So sheep are 60-30. So really close. I think there was a question in our breakout about how close cattle and sheep were. So what do you think about goats? You've heard me mention this a time or two, but what do you think the distribution is for weeds and browse for goats? Put it in the chat there, if you will. 60 weed, 20 browse. Well, flip-flop that, and that may have been what you meant there, but they browse about 60% of the time if they have it available. So thanks for the ones that responded in the chat there on that. We'll move through these, and Caitlin, you hop in here. I know this is one of your topics you like to talk about, but I wanted to briefly mention dung beetles and their impacts. They help recycle nutrients by breaking up manure. They can bring organic matter down into the soil profile, down 18 inches in some cases, and they also are reduce the amount of refuse areas within the pasture. So we've got a graphic representation here. I really like this photo. This shows the three different types of dung beetles. We have shredders, rollers, and tunnelers. I know as a younger person, I saw the dung beetles maybe in Africa rolling the manure, the dung, and really didn't know that there were two other types, but they're all three very important to what we see with our underground herd, if you will. So the many benefits of dung beetles: manure distribution. We have less areas of refusal, and it helps with fly and parasite control. So we want to keep this in mind, and also we want to keep this in mind whenever we use dewormers. We have dung beetle friendly options here, and again, this table is for informational purposes only. As is the entire presentation. This does not represent USDA or NRCS. We're not endorsing any particular products here, but we did want to show this to you because it is something to keep in mind as we utilize our deworming products. But looking down here, monodectin and sidectin is unlikely to be toxic to dung beetles. So I know Caitlin has may chime in here and talk about your mindset whenever you worm in times of year. But this is important for us for consideration. Anything else to add there, Caitlin?
Yeah, I can say, I mean, dung beetles is something that we've been really trying to encourage more on our farm. We started that a couple years ago now. Just that one picture that Matthew had showed where you see all the patches of green. There's a couple reasons for that, but I think, you take all those patches of green, those are areas that are refuse, areas that animals have urinated, defecated on. They're, well, mainly where there's patties. And so those dark patches, but they're not going to eat those dark patches. So for us, one day I looked and I was like, yeah, I mean, we've got soil fertility issues, but if we can get these patties broken down a little bit better, we're going to have a lot less areas of refuse, and we can actually increase our stocking rates then. So that's why we started focusing on it. It is a little bit tricky because there's not a lot of materials out there that are dung beetle friendly. So we will use something like a sidectin in the spring when we know if we do have worms. We'll use that in the spring when we know that dung beetles are going to start being active, and then use one of the other methods in the wintertime or the fall if we have to, when we know their activity is going to die down a little bit, because you don't want to use the same moxidectin over and over and over again, because then you're just going to build resistance. So that's how we've been managing for it.
Caitlin, do you see the question in the chat? how long after deworming should an animal be kept off a pasture to prevent a negative impact to the dung beetle? Do you have an
That
idea on that?
It depends on the type of dewormer that it is. They all have different residuals. So something like an ivermectin, I believe, is actually a couple months. But yeah, and there are some that are longer than that. I think there's some that are shorter than that too. Cydectin doesn't, that's why we like it, is because it doesn't really have any harmful effects, so we can put them right on the pasture right away. Okay, I'm going to go through this real briefly, just give you some overwintering solutions. So dry lots, there's, super crucial to maintain our soil health. This gives us an area to bring those animals off of the pasture so they're not overgrazing. We don't get that pugging in the wintertime or when it's wet. They can be complicated, like a concrete lot. They can be like a gravel lot. I think the next picture there is the construction of a gravel lot, or it can just be a dirt lot. The main thing is to make sure they're drained, they're sloped, and they're buffered. That's, they're located in the right spot and they're built the right way. Next slide, please. Okay, these are some pictures I'll show you real quick of our feeder barnyard. This is how we manage our cows. We bed very heavily with wood chips for our cows. It's a free resource for us. We got hooked up on that chip drop app, if you guys have that, and so we have some landscapers we work with that bring us chips. So this is what we do to bed down ours. You can see in the next, if you want to bring in the next photo there, and the next one, it's just a circle. Yep. So part of our roof got torn off in a storm, and as part of that, the fascia and the gutter also came off. So this obviously is not something that you want at your farm, because all that roof water now is just going right into our barnyard. And then on the other side of our barnyard, the same thing. We don't even have a gutter on the one side. And then the gutter that we do have, that actually empties into the barn. So it rains in the barn. These are all things that we are working on. Hopefully when I go home, I'm on vacation right now, and hopefully when I go home, that roof is going to be fixed. And we did buy everything again. We have the gutters and everything to fix this problem. We've had it since last fall. It's just the time that we need to do it. But it's super important to make sure you manage your water appropriately, because while it doesn't get deep in our barnyard, it does get muddy. It won't get more than about an inch and a half, but it does get muddy in there if we don't bed it down enough and clean it out and bed it down a couple times a year. All right, next slide, please. Another option is a compost bedded pack barn. This is a really great option if you have infrastructure in place, or if you have the money to build the infrastructure. When you put in one of these barns, you're taking that manure, you're taking fluffy materials like wood chips and things like that, and you're actually composting in place. So especially in the wintertime, it will actually be warmer inside these barns than outside, and mainly because of that compost in action, the heat that's released from it. And you can spread that right on your fields once you take it out. It doesn't need any further treatment. It is, like I said, it's high management. You do have to go in about multiple times a week and turn that over, because you're composting inside of the barn there. And if you don't have the infrastructure in place, it can be pretty costly. Next one. Next slide. All right, bale grazing. This is something that can be a whole nother presentation on its own. It's kind of an up and coming thing. I wish we did it more at our farm. I'm a little bit terrified of it, to be honest with you, but it is a really great practice, especially when it comes to soil health, keeping the ground covered. So here's a picture here of what it looks like when you're done grazing. And then Matthew, if you could add the next picture. Again, nutrients in the field, something we definitely want to think about. We get really great nutrient distribution with this. And one more picture on this slide. And here's what it looks like. You can tell the difference of where the bale was, right where this little girl is standing. Very high grass, dark green, lots of nutrients, lots of turnover, decomp from the hay that was left over, and then the rest of the field a little bit more sparse. So we can really improve sites in a pasture using bale grazing techniques. All right, next slide, please. And we're in breakout number 2.
All right. Wonderful. Hello there, everybody. I know that a lot of us are probably still in mid-chat. I know that we're running a little short on time today. We've packed in so much good content, but certainly in the last few minutes that we have of wrapping up, before I turn it over quickly to Matthew and Caitlyn again, please put the questions that have been left unanswered for you in the chat. I will be happy to make sure that we get those addressed. In the meantime, Caitlyn and Matthew, did you want to do a little wrap up before we head towards our few announcements and our post-evaluation questions?
Sure, Rachel. There's one question in the chat that I would like to address right quick if we could. Do we have time for that?
Sure, yeah.
There was a question that came in, I believe, when Caitlyn was talking about after a couple of years, they tilled a heavily trafficked area, and the question was, are there other methods other than tilling to treat heavily compacted areas? And I hope that was addressed during Caitlyn's section. But yes, we do prefer a utilization of vegetative methods for that, but it does take time. And I'm assuming that in Caitlyn's situation that she, after 2 years of trying that it just got to the point where she could no longer wait. But in rescue efforts like that, we do typically have to, sometimes have to incorporate some type of tillage pass or two to get that land where it's a suitable seed bed. But we do like to, in situations where it's not a rescue type issue and it can be remedied with vegetation, that we do promote that. And we talked about that during our breakout about using a mixture of deep-rooted taproot, fibrous root plants, legumes as well, and helping to remediate that issue. And let's see, there was another question. I see, Jim, you had about no-till options related to relieving compaction, and let me know if you want us to expand more on that.
No, sorry, that was that. I think you hit it right on the head there. Thank you. Okay.
Let's see, a question about pasture mixes. Yeah, I typically try to rotate between, and I'll use 2 different sets of annuals for my goat pasture, and I can get with Rachel on that for the sake of time. I think I'll just get those mixes to you, Rachel, and you can share those if you don't mind. I apologize. I know we're running short, and I want to give Caitlyn some time as well.
I was just going to comment. Who was it? Dennis had a good comment about if you are thinking about using wood chips, make sure you don't get any poisonous species, which is something that we're very concerned about at our farm. So we have a really good relationship with our supplier, and we told them we absolutely cannot get. For us, it's things like yew bushes and things like that. That are a concern of ours, cherry, things like that. So if you're going to be sourcing wood chips, especially if you're going to be using it for bedding and things like that, make sure you know exactly where it's coming from. I'm not quite sure if I would feel comfortable buying from like a really big, manufacturer of wood chips where they just take a whole bunch of stuff and put it into one spot. I really like the relationship we have with our local tree guys. They know exactly what we can have and what we cannot have. So excellent comment on that. Something you definitely need to consider if you're going to be using wood chips anywhere on the farm. And Matthew, we can put those mixes if you want. When I put together that packet for everybody, I can include that in there too.
Sounds good. I'm making myself a note now.
I send out a monthly correspondence email to everybody who is actively participating in our webinars. So all this information will go out in that, and then also we'll post everything to our project website too. So plenty of ways to find all of the materials that you guys send along after we wrap up today. So I know it is 12 o'clock. I'd like to ask Francis to put our link for our post-evaluation questions in the chat box now, and certainly go ahead and answer those. They're pretty straightforward and simple, just as the pre-evaluation questions were. Again, if for some reason you can't find yourself connecting, we will send those out after today's program, and you can answer those questions again at that point. Just a quick wrap up of today and moving forward for our Tri-State SARE project. First, actually, let me back up and thank Matthew and Caitlyn for joining us today. I appreciate not only the content, but your personal stories. It tends to add so much and give so much perspective to those folks participating. So we really appreciate your time and your energy and your efforts. Secondly, this webinar does wrap up our three webinar series on soil health for this year. We are moving forward in planning a soil health trailer tour throughout southern New England this year. We have worked with several other organizations in our region, and we will be promoting the tour fairly soon. We have a few last little details to wrap up, but the Tri-State SARE project host site will be in Connecticut. It will take place on June 24th in Summers at Scantic Valley Farm. But there will be another 4 workshops that this trailer will be at throughout Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So there will certainly be more information forthcoming here in the future, sooner rather than later, and I will make sure that I share that with everybody. Again, real quickly, before you sign off, if there's any other questions that you have that have popped into your head, please go ahead and post them now. I will make sure we get those addressed for you. And with that, thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and certainly feel free to reach out at any time with questions or needing some direction. We're happy to help in any way that we can. All right, thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.